In a luxurious, isolated castle, a millionaire used to controlling everything is challenged. A virgin woman tells him, "If you spend an entire night without touching me, I'll be your wife." If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. The last rays of sunset cast long shadows across the stone walls of Blackridge Manor, an imposing castle perched on the cliffs of Maine's rugged coastline. The structure, a testament to wealth and eccentricity, belonged to Ethan Blackwood, a man whose financial empire stretched across technology, real estate and energy sectors worldwide. Tonight, as the ocean waves crashed against the rocks below, the castle's grand hall was illuminated by dozens of candles, creating an atmosphere that seemed both intimate and imposing. Ethan stood by the massive fireplace, swirling a glass of rare scotch, his tall frame silhouetted against the dancing flames. At 42, he carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to command. His sharp features, permanently tanned from frequent travels, and penetrating steel blue eyes had graced countless magazine covers, earning him the title of America's most eligible bachelor. But those who knew him well understood that behind the polished exterior lay a man who valued control above all else. "Quite the dramatic setting you've chosen, Mr. Blackwood," came a voice from the entrance, melodic, yet carrying an edge of challenge. Ethan turned to find Sophia Reynolds standing at the threshold, her presence immediately altering the energy in the room. At 29, she possessed the kind of beauty that demanded attention without seeming to try. Her dark hair cascaded over bare shoulders, and her emerald green dress hugged her curves before flowing gracefully to the floor. But it wasn't just her appearance that captivated. It was the intelligence that sparkled in her amber eyes, the hint of mystery in her smile. "I prefer environments that match the occasion, Ms. Reynolds," Ethan replied, gesturing for her to enter. "And tonight's arrangement certainly calls for something memorable." Sophia walked toward him with unhurried confidence, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "You make it sound like a business transaction." "Isn't it?" He raised an eyebrow. "You've proposed terms and I've accepted. Business is what I do best." She laughed, a sound that seemed to brighten the dimly lit room. "Oh, Ethan, always reducing everything to numbers and deals." She reached him and took the glass from his hand, her fingers brushing against his deliberately. "But this challenge is about something far more unpredictable." 3 days ago, they had met at a charity gala in New York. Ethan had attended, out of obligation, another opportunity to maintain his public image while securing connections. Sophia had been there representing an art foundation, but she'd stood out immediately, not just for her beauty, but for the way she seemed entirely unimpressed by the wealth and influence surrounding her. When they'd been introduced, she'd looked at him with an appraising gaze that few dared direct at Ethan Blackwood. Their conversation had been a verbal sparring match that left him intrigued despite himself. When she declined his standard invitation back to his penthouse, offering instead this unusual proposition, he'd been caught off guard for the first time in years. "If you can spend an entire night with me without touching me," she had said, her voice low and challenging, "I'll marry you. If you fail, well, you'll have proven that even the great Ethan Blackwood isn't always in control." None see. Proposal was absurd, reckless. Any rational person would have walked away. But Ethan had built his empire by taking calculated risks, and something about this woman made him unable to refuse. He had laughed it off as a game, a diversion from his carefully structured life. What could be simpler than not touching someone for a single night? Now, as she stood before him in his ancestral home, the air between them charged with unspoken tension, he began to suspect that he had underestimated the challenge. "Shall we begin?" Sophia asked, taking a seat on the plush, velvet sofa without waiting for an invitation. She exuded a casual confidence that contradicted her position as a guest in his domain. "The night has already begun," Ethan countered, choosing an armchair across from her, maintaining a safe distance. "Midnight to midnight, as agreed." 12 hours of restraint, she smiled, a predatory curve of her lips. For a man who commands multinational corporations with a word, it should be simple enough. Ethan leaned back, studying her with narrowed eyes. What I don't understand, Ms. Reynolds, is your motivation. Why propose marriage to a man you barely know? Perhaps I'm a fortune hunter, she suggested, her tone playful. Or maybe I see something in you that others miss. She leaned forward, and the movement caused her dress to slip slightly, revealing the curve of her shoulder. Does my motivation matter as long as the game interests you? Everything matters to me, Ethan replied. I didn't build what I have by ignoring details. And what exactly have you built, Ethan? Her voice softened, becoming almost gentle. An empire of glass and steel? Billions in accounts around the world? Or just a fortress around yourself? The question struck too close to truths he preferred not to examine. Ethan stood abruptly, moving to pour himself another drink. We agreed to a night of restraint, not psychological analysis. Did I touch a nerve? Sophia watched him, her head tilted. Physical distance is one thing, but emotional barriers, those are your real specialty, aren't they? Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating the room in stark white light, followed by the low rumble of thunder. The weather seemed to mirror the tension building inside. A storm's coming, Ethan observed, changing the subject. You've chosen an interesting night for this game of yours. Perfect timing, I'd say, Sophia replied. Nothing like being trapped in a castle during a storm. Very gothic romance. I wasn't aware romance was part of our arrangement. Isn't it? She rose and walked toward the windows, looking out at the darkening sky. A beautiful woman. A powerful man, a night of enforced distance. Sounds like the premise of something passionate to me. Ethan watched her silhouette against the window, feeling an unexpected pull toward her. This was supposed to be easy, a simple exercise in self-control. He'd spent his life mastering his impulses, channeling them into building his empire. One night of restraint should be nothing. Yet there was something about Sophia Reynolds that unsettled him. She didn't behave like the women who typically occupied his world, those who either feared his power or sought to exploit it. She acted as though they were equals, and more disturbingly, as though she could see through the carefully constructed persona he presented to the world. You know, she said, still gazing at the storm, most people look at you and see only what you want them to see. The billionaire, the titan of industry, the man who has everything. She turned to face him, her expression suddenly serious. But I see the cracks in the facade, Ethan. The way your smile never reaches your eyes when you're at those galas. The way you hold yourself apart, always observing, never participating. How you've made quite a study of me, he replied, unsettled by her perception. Let's just say I recognize the signs. Her voice carried a hint of shared experience. We're not so different, you and I. A flash of lightning illuminated her face, revealing a momentary vulnerability that vanished so quickly. Ethan wondered if he'd imagined it. Different enough, he countered. I don't make ridiculous wagers with strangers. And yet here we are, she smiled again, that enigmatic curve of her lips that both attracted and warned. The night is young, Ethan, and I have so many ways to make it interesting. As if on cue, the lights flickered and went out, leaving only the fire and candles to illuminate the vast room. Perfect timing, Sophia murmured, her silhouette moving closer to him in the dimness. Now the real challenge begins. Ethan felt his heart rate increase slightly, a physiological response he hadn't experienced in years. This woman, with her cryptic comments and knowing smile, was doing something no business rival had ever managed. She was making him question his own certainty. As the storm raged outside, Ethan Blackwood prepared himself for a battle unlike any he'd fought before. Not for money or power, but for something he'd always taken for granted, his absolute self-control. What he didn't yet realize was that by the time dawn broke over, Blackridge Manor, nothing in his carefully ordered world would remain unchanged. The storm had intensified, rain lashing against the ancient windows of Blackridge Manor as if demanding entry. Inside the Grand Library, where Ethan and Sophia had relocated after the power outage, the flickering light from the fireplace cast moving shadows across rows of leather-bound books. The scent of aged paper mingled with the woody aroma of burning, logs creating an atmosphere both intimate and charged with unspoken tension. Ethan stood by the antique globe in the corner, deliberately maintaining his distance from Sophia, who had curled up in a leather armchair, her bare feet tucked beneath her. The casual posture contrasted sharply with the elegant dress she wore, creating an image of effortless sensuality that wasn't lost on him. "Your collection is impressive," she noted, gesturing to the walls of books surrounding them. "First editions of Hemingway, Fitzgerald, Steinbeck. You actually read them, or are they just for show?" "I don't acquire things solely for appearance," Ethan replied, rotating the globe absently. "Unlike most people, I value substance over style." "Sophia," laughed softly. "Says the man whose face has appeared on the cover of Fortune magazine 6 times. Business necessitates certain public appearances." He turned to face her. "But this," he gestured to the library, "this is private. Few people have seen this room." "I'm flattered to be among the selected few." Her tone was teasing, but her eyes held a genuine curiosity. "Though I suspect your staff has seen it." "Only Harriet, my housekeeper. She's been with me since I acquired this place 15 years ago." Ethan moved to pour 2 glasses of wine from a decanter on a side table. "Staff doesn't typically stay long in my employ. Let me guess. You demand perfection and few meet your standards." She accepted the glass he offered, careful to avoid contact with his fingers. "I expect excellence from myself. Why would I expect less from others?" Sophia sipped her wine, studying him over the rim of her glass. "And when was the last time you failed to meet your own exacting standards, Ethan?" The question hung in the air, weighted with implication. Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but Sophia caught the reaction and pressed her advantage. "Everyone has moments of weakness, of failure. Even the great Ethan Blackwood must have fallen short at some point." Lightning flashed, illuminating his face for an instant, revealing a hardness that hadn't been there before. "We're not playing truth or dare, Ms. Reynolds." "No. We're playing something far more dangerous." She set down her wine and stood, moving toward the fire. The flames cast a golden glow on her skin as she warmed her hands. "Tell me about your childhood, Ethan. Did the drive for control begin there?" His laugh was short, devoid of humor. "Typical. Attempting amateur psychology to find leverage." "Not leverage," she corrected softly. "Understanding." "There's nothing to understand. I had a perfectly ordinary upbringing in Connecticut. The lie came easily, practiced over decades." Sophia turned to face him, her expression skeptical. "Connecticut? That's interesting, considering that all public records show you were born in Riverside, California, to a single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep a roof over your head." Ethan went still, his expression shuttering closed like a vault door. "You've done your research." "Thoroughly," she nodded, unapologetic. "Just as you undoubtedly investigated me before agreeing to this night." Her eyes challenged him to deny. Did? He didn't. After she'd made her proposal at the gala, he'd had his security team compile a comprehensive file on Sophia Reynolds. But the information had been frustratingly incomplete. Art history degree from UCLA, currently working for the Reynolds Foundation. No criminal record, no scandalous history. Nothing that explained her interest in him or this unusual challenge. "Daniel, Reynolds is your uncle, not your father," Ethan stated, watching her carefully for a reaction. "You took his name when you went to live with him at age 16. Something flickered in her eyes, surprise perhaps that he'd discovered that detail. "Yes. After my parents were gone, Uncle Daniel became my guardian." "Gone" is a convenient euphemism. Ethan moved closer, sensing vulnerability. "Your father abandoned your family when you were 12, and your mother surrendered to her addiction when you were 16. Her chin lifted slightly, a subtle gesture of defiance. "If you're trying to unsettle me by dredging up my past, you'll need to try harder. I've never hidden from my history." "Unlike me." His voice was quiet, dangerous. "Yes, unlike you." She met his gaze without flinching. "You've buried your origins so deeply that most biographical articles about you begin with your first million. as if Ethan Blackwood emerged fully formed as a financial genius, with no childhood, no struggles, no humanity. The accusation struck with uncomfortable precision. For years, Ethan had carefully constructed his public persona, erasing all traces of the desperate, powerless boy he'd once been. The son of a waitress who died too young, leaving him to navigate foster homes and state facilities, where control had been a luxury he couldn't afford. "My past is irrelevant to who I am now," he stated flatly. "Is it?" Sophia moved toward him, stopping just short of the invisible boundary between them. "Or is it the very thing that drives you, the need to control everything because once you had control over nothing?" Thunder crashed outside, as if emphasizing her words. The library suddenly felt too small, too intimate, the air heavy with unspoken truths. "You know nothing about me." His voice was low, controlled, despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. "I know that you built your first company from nothing, sleeping on a friend's couch while working 20-hour days," she said, her voice gentler now. "I know that you donated anonymously to the women's shelter in Riverside, where you and your mother stayed briefly when you were 9. She paused, letting the words sink in. "I know that beneath the billionaire facade there's a man who remembers what it was like to be powerless." Ethan turned away, moving to the window to stare out at the storm, his reflection ghostly in the glass. "Why this interest in my past? What's your real purpose here, Sophia?" She didn't answer immediately, and when she did, her tone had changed, becoming almost confessional. "Maybe I see something of myself in you. Different circumstances, similar wounds." She joined him at the window, their reflections side by side, in the dark glass. "We both learned early that trusting others is dangerous. And yet you're proposing marriage to a man you barely know." He turned to face her, studying her expression. "Why would someone with trust issues make such an offer?" Sophia smiled enigmatically. "Perhaps I'm tired of games. Perhaps I want something real for once. Or perhaps there's something else entirely that you want from me." Ethan's voice hardened, something beyond the obvious. Before she could respond, a sharp knock interrupted them. Harriet, Ethan's elderly housekeeper, stood in the doorway, her weathered face lined with concern. "I'm sorry to disturb you, Mr. Blackwood, but there's a gentleman at the door. Says he needs to speak with Ms. Reynolds urgently." Her disapproving tone made it clear she thought little of visitors arriving in the middle of a storm at such an hour. Sophia's composure faltered for the first time that evening. "A man? Did he give a name?" "Mr. Alexander Pierce, ma'am." Harriet sniffed slightly. "Insisted it was a matter of some importance." The color drained from Sophia's face, and her fingers tightened around her wineglass. "Alex is here," she whispered, more to herself than to the others. Ethan didn't miss her reaction. "Who is Alexander Pierce?" Sophia recovered quickly, but not before Ethan glimpsed genuine fear in her eyes. "An old associate from my uncle's foundation." She turned to Harriet. "Please tell Mr. Pierce I'm indisposed." "Already tried that, ma'am. He was most insistent." Harriet looked to Ethan for instruction. "Show him in," Ethan decided, ignoring Sophia's sharp look of protest. "I'm curious to meet this urgent visitor." As Harriet left to fetch their unexpected guest, Sophia moved quickly to Ethan's side, her earlier caution forgotten as she gripped his arm. "You don't understand," she whispered urgently. "Alex Pierce is dangerous. He's not who he claims to be." "And who exactly is he?" Ethan asked, not removing her hand from his arm despite their challenge. Before she could answer, footsteps sounded in the hallway. Sophia stepped back hastily, composing her features into a neutral expression as a man appeared in the doorway. Alexander Pierce cut an impressive figure, tall, impeccably dressed despite the storm, with the kind of classically handsome features that seemed designed for old money and privilege. His smile, directed first at Sophia, then at Ethan, didn't reach his cold grey eyes. "Sophia, darling," he drawled, stepping into the library as if he owned it. "What a coincidence finding you here." His gaze shifted to Ethan, assessing. "Mr. Blackwood, an honor to meet you at last." "Pierce?" Ethan nodded coolly. "I understand you have urgent business with Ms. Reynolds." "Indeed I do." Pierce moved further into the room, forcing Sophia to step back. Family business, I'm afraid. Daniel sent me to fetch her. My uncle would have called me directly, Sophia countered, her voice steady despite the tension evident in her posture. And he knows I'm unavailable tonight. Pierce's smile tightened. Yes, he mentioned you had an appointment. He didn't specify it was with America's most eligible bachelor. His eyes moved between them, calculating. How fascinating. Ethan sensed the undercurrents of threat beneath Pierce's polished exterior. This man was no mere Foundation employee. The way he carried himself, the subtle dominance in his stance, the watchful intelligence in his eyes, all suggested someone accustomed to power and its exercise. More importantly, he clearly terrified Sophia, though she was doing her best to hide it. "Mr. Pierce," Ethan said smoothly, moving to stand slightly in front of Sophia in a subtle gesture of protection. "While I appreciate your concern for Miss Reynolds, she's my guest tonight, and we have matters to discuss that can't be interrupted." Pierce's gaze hardened, though his smile remained fixed. "I see. Well, I wouldn't dream of intruding on your discussions." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a business card, extending it to Sophia. "When you're finished here, call me. Daniel is quite anxious to speak with you about certain discoveries we've made." Sophia took the card without touching. His fingers, her face impassive. "I'll contact my uncle directly, thank you." Pierce laughed, softly, the sound devoid of warmth. "Always the independent one." His gaze shifted to Ethan. "Be careful with this one, Blackwood. She has a tendency to disappear when things get complicated." With that cryptic warning, he nodded to them both and turned to leave. At the doorway, he paused, looking back at Sophia with an expression that sent a chill through the room. "We'll continue our conversation soon, Sophia. Very soon." After Pierce's departure, silence filled the library, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the persistent drumming of rain against the windows. Sophia stood motionless, the business card clutched in her trembling hand. Ethan watched her, reassessing everything he thought he knew about this enigmatic woman and the night's strange challenge. "I think," he said finally, his voice cutting through the silence, "that it's time for some honest answers, Miss Reynolds." Sophia looked up at him, her earlier confidence replaced by a vulnerability that seemed far more genuine. "Yes," she agreed quietly. "I suppose it is." The grandfather clock in the corner of the library chimed 3 times, marking the halfway point of their challenge. Rain continued to pelt against the windows, but the thunder had receded to distant rumbles, as if the storm was gathering strength for another assault. Sophia stood by the fireplace, her composed facade finally showing cracks. She had discarded her heels hours ago, and without them, she seemed smaller, more vulnerable. The business card Pierce had left was now ash in the fire, consumed by flames as Ethan watched silently. "Alexander Pierce isn't just my uncle's associate," she began, her voice barely audible above the crackling fire. "He's his enforcer." Ethan leaned against a bookshelf, maintaining his distance despite the growing urge to close the gap between them. "Your uncle requires an enforcer for an art foundation?" A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "The Reynolds Foundation is legitimate, but it's also a convenient front. My uncle's real business interests are more diverse." "I suspected as much," Ethan crossed his arms. "Daniel Reynolds appeared on the business scene 20 years ago with no background, no history, just sudden wealth and connections. I've always wondered about the source of his fortune." "You're not the only one." Sophia's fingers traced the edge of the mantelpiece absently. "The authorities have investigated him multiple times, but they've never found anything concrete. My uncle is too careful, too protected. And where do you fit into this, Sophia? Are you just another part of his facade?" She turned to face him, indignation flashing in her eyes. "I've spent my entire adult life trying to distance myself from him. The Foundation's legitimate work, supporting artists, funding educational programs, that's all my initiative. It's the only reason I stay connected to the Reynolds name at all. Yet you live on his money, work for his organization." Ethan's tone wasn't accusatory, merely observational. "Not by choice." Sophia moved away from the fire, pacing the room like a caged animal. When my mother died, I had nowhere else to go. Daniel was my mother's brother. He took me in, paid for my education, gave me opportunities I never would have had otherwise. Her voice softened. But there were conditions. There always are. Ethan understood conditions all too well. His own rise to power had been littered with compromises, decisions that still haunted him in the rare moments he allowed himself to reflect. I thought I could create something good within his world. Use his resources for positive change while keeping my distance from the darker aspects of his business. She stopped her pacing, looking at Ethan directly. It worked for a while. He let me run the foundation my way, as long as I attended the right events, maintained the right image, stayed silent about what I knew, until now. Ethan studied her face, reading the fear that lingered there. What changed, Sophia? She hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. 6 months ago, I discovered documents in my uncle's private study, evidence linking him to activities I can't ignore. Money laundering on a massive scale, blackmail of public officials, strategic bankruptcies that ruined thousands of lives while enriching his inner circle. Ethan's mind raced, connecting dots he'd never fully examined before. Several of his own competitors had faced sudden, inexplicable financial collapses over the years, leaving openings that Blackwood Enterprises had naturally filled. He'd attributed it to market forces and his own strategic foresight. But now, he wondered if there had been an invisible hand guiding those opportunities. You've been gathering evidence against your own uncle, he surmised, his respect for her growing despite his suspicion. I have, Sophia nodded. But last week, Pierce caught me in Daniel's office. He didn't know what I'd found, but he suspected something. I needed to disappear, to hide somewhere while I figured out my next move. So you approached me at the gala. The pieces were falling into place. You needed a safe house, and what better place than the heavily secured home of one of America's most powerful men? It wasn't that calculated, Sophia protested, though her eyes betrayed her. I genuinely was intrigued by you, Ethan. I've watched your career for years. How you built an empire from nothing. How you outmaneuvered men like my uncle without resorting to their methods. You fascinated me long before I needed your protection. Hence, the marriage proposal if I win this ridiculous challenge. Ethan's voice carried a hint of disappointment. A convenient way to secure long-term protection under the Blackwood name. Sophia approached him slowly, stopping just short of touching distance. The challenge was impulsive, yes, but not calculated the way you think. Her eyes met his, unflinching. I needed to know if you were different from the other powerful men I've known, if you could resist immediate gratification for something more valuable. And what would that be? Ethan asked, his voice lower now. Trust, she said simply. The chance to build something real, not based on control or fear or manipulation. All my life, I've been surrounded by men who take what they want without hesitation. Men like my father, who abandoned us when responsibility became inconvenient. Men like my uncle, who collects people like assets. Men like Pierce, who views women as territory to be claimed. She took a breath, vulnerability and strength somehow coexisting in her expression. I needed to know if you could see me as a person, not a possession. If you could respect boundaries even when it would be easy to ignore them. Outside, the rain intensified again, the storm returning for its second act. Inside, the tension between them shifted into something more complex than the simple game of resistance they'd begun with. You could have simply asked for my help, Ethan said finally. I have resources, connections. I could have protected you without this elaborate test. Sophia smiled sadly. Would you have believed me? A woman you just met, making accusations against a respected philanthropist? Or would you have assumed I was trying to manipulate you, use you in some power play? The question hit uncomfortably close to home. Ethan had spent decades building walls to keep people at arm's length, protecting himself from exactly the kind of vulnerability Sophia was describing. Would he have trusted her without this night of forced intimacy? The honest answer was no. What evidence do you have against your uncle? He asked instead, sidestepping her question. Financial records, offshore account numbers, recorded conversations. She hesitated. And something else, something that concerns you directly. Ethan tensed. Explain. 3 years ago, Sentinel Technologies was on the verge of releasing quantum encryption software that would have revolutionized data security. Sophia's voice was steady now, her eyes never leaving his. Your company, Blackwood Tech, acquired Sentinel after its sudden collapse for pennies on the dollar. That acquisition became the cornerstone of your cybersecurity division. Sentinel's CEO mismanaged the company into bankruptcy, Ethan stated, the official narrative he'd always accepted. Their stock plummeted after a series of security breaches exposed vulnerabilities in their systems. Those breaches were orchestrated by my uncle's tech specialists, Sophia countered. They systematically undermined Sentinel's security, planted evidence of mismanagement, and destroyed the company's reputation. Also that you could acquire their technology at a fraction of its value. Ethan's mind raced back to that acquisition. He remembered thinking it was suspiciously convenient timing, but the opportunity had been too perfect to question deeply. His cybersecurity division now generated billions annually, all built on Sentinel's innovative foundation. I had nothing to do with Sentinel's collapse, he said, his voice hardening. I know. Sophia's response surprised him. But my uncle did, and he did it specifically to benefit you. He's been cultivating you, Ethan, creating strategic opportunities, removing obstacles, guiding your empire's growth from the shadows. Why? The single word contained a multitude of emotions, disbelief, anger, the beginning of a profound unsettling. Because he needs legitimate partners with clean reputations. People above suspicion who can move in circles he can't access directly. Sophia's expression was sympathetic, but unyielding. You're not the only one. There are others, politicians, judges, industry leaders, all beneficiaries of my uncle's invisible hand, all unwittingly serving his broader interests. Ethan turned away, moving to the window to stare out at the storm-lashed grounds of his estate. The foundations of his self-image, his belief in his own singular achievement, his pride in building his empire through intelligence, and sheer force of will, were cracking beneath him. You're suggesting that my success, my entire empire, is built on manipulation by your uncle. His voice was dangerously quiet. No. Sophia moved to stand behind him, close enough that he could sense her presence but still not touching. Your success is yours, Ethan. Your intelligence, your vision, your relentless drive. Those are real. Daniel simply tilted the playing field occasionally, removed specific obstacles, created particular opportunities. And now? Ethan turned to face her. What does he want from me now that would make him send Pierce here tonight? Something shifted in Sophia's expression, a flash of pain quickly, suppressed. He wants what he always wants, control. For years he's been positioning you as his eventual successor, the legitimate face who could take over his network while maintaining a respectable public image. I would never agree to that. Ethan's response was immediate, visceral, which is why he's never asked directly. Sophia's voice softened. He's been preparing you without your knowledge, placing his people in your organization, creating financial dependencies that you can't easily unwind. That's impossible. I vet every hire personally, review every major decision, control every aspect of my... Ethan stopped abruptly, the irony of his words striking him. His need for control, the very thing he prided himself on, had blinded him to the larger game being played. Your assistant, Michael Chen, Sophia said gently. Your head of security, Richard Davenport. Your chief financial officer, Teresa Mills, all placed in your organization through seemingly legitimate channels, all reporting to my uncle. The betrayal cut deep. These were people Ethan trusted, individuals who had access to every aspect of his business and personal life. If what Sophia was saying was true, and deep down he suspected it was, then the control he'd cherished had been an illusion all along. Why are you telling me this now? He asked, struggling to process the implications. Why risk your safety to expose your uncle's operations? Sophia's expression changed, becoming more open than he'd seen it all night. Because I'm tired of living in a world built on manipulation and control. Because the work I do at the Foundation, helping artists, creating educational opportunities, that's the only thing in my life that feels real and worthwhile. She paused, vulnerability evident in her eyes. And because when we met at that gala, I saw something in you that reminded me of myself, someone playing a role while keeping their true self hidden away. Their eyes locked across the small space separating them. The challenge that had begun as a game of resistance had evolved into something far more complicated, a confrontation not just with each other, but with the carefully constructed narratives of their own lives. "Dawn is still hours away," Ethan said quietly, "and it seems we have much more to discuss." Sophia nodded, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. "Yes. But there's something else you should know, something I haven't told you yet." She took a deep breath as if gathering courage. The real reason Pierce came tonight. Before she could continue, the library door burst open. Harriet stood there, her normally composed demeanor replaced by evident alarm. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm sorry to intrude, but there are men on the property." Her voice trembled slightly. "Security says they've disabled the perimeter cameras and are approaching the main house from multiple directions." Ethan moved immediately, years of business crises having honed his ability to shift into decisive action. "How many?" "At least 6 that we can see on the remaining cameras," Harriet replied. "Security is engaging, but they're outmanned." Sophia's face had gone pale. "It's Pierce. He wasn't just checking on me. He was assessing your security, finding vulnerabilities." Her eyes met Ethan's, fear and determination mingling in their depths. "My uncle doesn't just want your cooperation anymore, Ethan. He wants the evidence I've gathered against him, and he knows it's here with me." "Where is it?" Ethan demanded. Sophia hesitated only briefly before reaching into her clutch bag and removing a small data drive. "Everything's here, financial records, communications, connections to officials, enough to destroy him." Ethan took the drive, slipping it into his pocket just as the sound of breaking glass echoed from somewhere in the house, followed by the distant pop of gunfire. "We need to move. Now." He grasped Sophia's hand, the challenge of not touching her suddenly, irrelevant in the face of immediate danger. "Harriet, the tunnels." The elderly housekeeper nodded grimly. "Already unlocked the entrance, sir." As Ethan led Sophia toward a hidden panel behind the bookshelves, the library door splintered inward. Alexander Pierce stood. In the doorway, a pistol held casually at his side, his expression one of smug satisfaction. "Going somewhere?" he asked, as more men in tactical gear appeared behind him. "I'm afraid your evening has been cut short." Time seemed to compress in the library of Blackridge Manor. The crackling fire, the storm raging outside and the tension surrounding them created a surreal tableau, Ethan and Sophia by the hidden panel, Pierce and his men blocking the main exit, and Harriet standing resolute near her employer. "Alexander," Sophia's voice cut through the silence, steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. "This isn't necessary. Whatever Daniel wants." "What Daniel wants," Pierce interrupted, his cultured voice incongruous with the violence implicit in his stance, "is no longer relevant. He's become sentimental in his old age, unwilling to take necessary measures." His cold gaze shifted to Ethan. "Mr. Blackwood, I've admired your business acumen for years. Your acquisition of Sentinel Technologies was particularly impressive, even if you had some invisible assistance." Ethan's mind raced, calculating options, escape routes, potential, weapons within reach. Years of business negotiations had taught him to maintain composure in crisis. "Pierce, whatever game you're playing, this property is equipped with redundant security systems. My team has already alerted authorities." Pierce's smile was almost pitying. "Your security team is currently indisposed, and telecommunications from this charming castle have been temporarily disabled." He gestured with his pistol. "Now the data drive, if you please, the one our dear Sophia just handed you." Sophia stepped forward slightly, positioning herself between Pierce and Ethan. "The evidence doesn't just implicate Daniel, Alex. It implicates..." Every transaction you've overseen, every threat you've carried out. I've documented it all." Something dangerous flashed in Pierce's eyes, which is precisely why I can't allow that information to spread. Daniel may believe he can weather the storm of a public investigation, but I prefer a cleaner resolution. The implication hung in the air, chilling and unmistakable. This wasn't just about retrieving evidence. Pierce intended to eliminate the threat permanently. Harriet, who had been watching silently, suddenly spoke. "The tea is getting cold in the east sitting room, Mr. Blackwood." Her voice was casual, but her eyes conveyed a message. Ethan gave a slight nod, understanding immediately. The east sitting room connected to one of the castle's emergency exits, one that wouldn't appear on the building plans Pierce might have studied. "The drive, Mr. Blackwood," Pierce repeated, his patience visibly thinning. "And then perhaps we can discuss your future role in our organization. With Daniel's retirement approaching, we'll need someone with your public credibility." "You never intended to follow Daniel's plan," Sophia realized aloud, her voice tight with anger. "This isn't about protecting the organization. It's about taking control for yourself." Pierce shrugged elegantly. "Evolution is the natural order of things. Daniel built something impressive, but his methods have become outdated. The future requires a more decisive approach." His gaze hardened. "The drive now, or this becomes unnecessarily messy?" In that moment, the power dynamics shifted in a way none of them anticipated. Harriet, the seemingly frail housekeeper, moved with surprising speed, overturning a heavy side table to create momentary confusion. "Run!" she shouted to Ethan and Sophia. Pierce's momentary distraction was all Ethan needed. He yanked the hidden panel open and pushed Sophia through, following close behind as gunfire erupted in the library. The last thing he saw before sealing the passage was Harriet diving behind a heavy oak desk as Pierce's men opened fire. The secret passage was narrow and dimly lit by emergency lighting embedded in the floor. It sloped downward, leading into the foundations of the castle. "Harriet," Sophia gasped as they ran, "has more training than you'd expect," Ethan replied grimly, leading her through the winding tunnel. "Former intelligence operative. She's not just my housekeeper, she's my chief of security." "You knew," Sophia accused, breathless from their pace. "You knew something like this might happen." "I've built my life around contingencies," Ethan admitted. "Though I didn't expect this particular scenario." He glanced at her as they hurried through the passage. "You've placed me in an impossible position, Sophia. Whatever is on that drive doesn't just threaten your uncle. It could implicate me, destroy everything I've built. Or free you," she countered. "Free you from the invisible strings Daniel has been pulling all these years." They reached a junction where the passage split in 3 directions. Ethan hesitated only briefly before selecting the rightmost path. "This leads to a boathouse on the eastern shore. There's a boat we can use to reach the mainland." As they continued their escape, the sounds of pursuit echoed behind them. Footsteps, voices, the crack of a gunshot against stone. Pierce had found the passage entrance. "We need to move faster," Sophia urged, but Ethan suddenly pulled her into a small alcove, pressing a finger to his lips in warning. Moments later, 2 of Pierce's men rushed past their hiding place, heading down the wrong fork in the passage. When the footsteps faded, Ethan led them back to the main tunnel, now moving with deliberate quiet rather than speed. "They'll expect us to run straight for the exit," he whispered. "We need to be smarter." The tunnels beneath Blackridge Manor were a complex network, built during Prohibition for smuggling and expanded by Ethan for security purposes. They moved through the labyrinth with Ethan leading confidently, the distant sounds of their pursuers occasionally echoing through the stone corridors. "There's something you need to know," Sophia said as they paused at another junction, her voice barely audible. "About the challenge, about why I really came here tonight. This isn't the time for confessions," Ethan replied tersely, checking around a corner before signaling her to follow. "It might be the only time." Her hand caught his arm, forcing him to face her in the dim emergency lighting. "Daniel didn't just manipulate your business opportunities, Ethan. He's been manipulating your personal life too." Ethan stilled, his expression hardening. "Explain." The women you've been involved with over the years, the models, the socialites, the corporate lawyers, many of them were placed in your path deliberately. Sophia's eyes held his, unflinching despite the pain her words clearly caused. Daniel wanted to ensure you remained emotionally isolated, focused solely on building your empire, while he positioned his people around you. The revelation hit Ethan like a physical blow. His romantic history had been sparse, marked by brief relationships that inevitably ended when the women demanded more emotional involvement than he was willing to give. He'd attributed it to his own inability to connect, his prioritization of business over personal attachments. The idea that even this aspect of his life had been orchestrated. "How do you know this?" he demanded, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Because 6 months ago he asked me to be the next one." Shame colored her confession. He wanted someone he trusted to get closer to you, to monitor your activities from within your inner circle. "That's how I knew who you were at the gala. I'd been studying you for months." Understanding dawned, cold and clarifying. So the challenge was never about testing my control. It was about gaining mine. Initially, yes, Sophia's honesty was brutal. But then I found the evidence of what Daniel had been doing, not just to you, but to dozens of others. People whose lives he'd manipulated, destroyed, or reshaped to serve his purposes. Her voice softened. "And the more I learned about you, the more I realized we were both prisoners of his design. That's when I decided to use my assignment to expose everything instead." A distant crash followed by shouting interrupted their conversation. Pierce and his men were getting closer, more desperate in their search. "We need to keep moving," Ethan said, his voice devoid of emotion. He pulled away from her touch and continued down the passage, leaving Sophia no choice but to follow. They emerged not at the boathouse as Sophia had expected, but in a small security hub built into the cliffside, overlooking the churning ocean below. Banks of monitors showed various locations around the property, the library now empty save for overturned furniture, the main entrance where several of Pierce's men stood guard, the tunnels where others continued their search. Ethan moved to a control panel, typing rapidly on a keyboard. "This system is isolated from the main security network. Pierce wouldn't know about it." "What are you doing?" Sophia asked, watching as various screens changed to show different views of the property. Creating a diversion, he pressed another sequence of keys, and suddenly alarms blared throughout the castle. On the monitors, they could see Pierce's men reacting with confusion, some abandoning their positions to investigate the new threat. "That will buy us a few minutes." Ethan moved to a cabinet on the far wall, unlocking it to reveal several passports, bundles of cash in various currencies, and a satellite phone. He took the phone and one of the passports, then turned to Sophia. "There's a path down to a small cove below. The boat there has enough fuel to reach Portland. Once there, you can disappear. New identity, new life." He held out the passport and a thick envelope of cash. "This should give you enough to start over somewhere Pierce can't find you." Sophia stared at the offered items without taking them. "You're not coming?" "No." Ethan's expression was unreadable. "I'm going back." "That's suicide," she protested. "Pierce will—" "Pierce doesn't know the full extent of my resources," Ethan interrupted, "or my contingency plans." He placed the passport and money on the desk between them. "You have what you need to expose your uncle's organization. Take it and go." Sophia stepped closer to him, searching his face. "Why are you doing this after everything I've just told you? The manipulation, the lies. Why help me escape?" For a moment, something raw and genuine broke through Ethan's carefully maintained facade. "Because for the first time in my life, I'm making a choice that isn't about control or power or winning. I'm choosing to trust someone else's judgment over my own certainty." His voice softened. "The very thing you were testing with your challenge." "I'm coming with you," Sophia decided, ignoring the escape materials he'd offered. "Whatever you're planning, you'll need help from someone who knows how Pierce thinks." "This isn't negotiable, Sophia." Ethan's tone hardened again. "I didn't build what I have by taking unnecessary risks. And I didn't survive my uncle's world by abandoning allies." She crossed her arms, her stance mirroring his own stubborn posture. Besides, I have something you need. She reached into her dress, removing a second, smaller data drive from a hidden pocket. Insurance. This contains files that will automatically upload to major news outlets if I don't enter a code every 24 hours. It's how I've stayed alive this long. Their standoff was interrupted by a flashing light on one of the monitors. Two of Pierce's men had discovered the entrance to the security hub and were making their way toward them. We don't have time to argue, Sophia insisted. Whatever your plan is, I'm part of it now. Ethan stared at her for a long moment, then made a decision. He moved to another cabinet, removing what looked like a small remote control. Do you trust me? He asked, his voice carrying a weight beyond the immediate danger. The question hung between them, loaded with layers of meaning after everything they'd shared. Sophia met his gaze steadily. Yes, she answered simply. Despite everything, Something shifted in Ethan's expression, a softening around the eyes, a tension releasing. He pressed a sequence of buttons on the remote, and suddenly the monitors showed Pierce's men scrambling, running toward exits. Moments later, a series of controlled explosions rocked the castle, not destroying it, but strategically sealing off access points, trapping the intruders inside. Blackridge Manor was built with more than just secret passages, Ethan explained, watching the chaos unfold on the screens. The entire structure can be locked down in sections, compartmentalized like a ship. Pierce and his men are now contained, and every piece of evidence of their invasion is being recorded and transmitted to secure servers. You're not just going to escape, Sophia realized, understanding dawning. You're going to expose them. Pierce made a critical error tonight, Ethan replied, a dangerous edge to his voice. He revealed himself, brought armed men onto American soil, threatened violence against a prominent businessman in his own home. Whatever protection your uncle's organization enjoys, this crosses lines that even the most corrupt officials can't ignore. He turned to face her fully. The evidence you gathered against your uncle is valuable, but what happened here tonight, captured on multiple security feeds, witnessed by my staff, that's irrefutable proof of criminal activity at the highest levels. Understanding bloomed in Sophia's eyes. You're turning their own tactics against them, creating a narrative they can't control. Exactly. Something like admiration flickered in Ethan's expression. Now we have approximately 15 minutes before authorities respond to the security alerts I've triggered. That gives us time for one last decision. He held up the data drive Sophia had given him earlier. This contains everything you've risked your life to gather. Evidence that could bring down your uncle's entire organization, but also potentially implicate legitimate businesses, including parts of my own empire. His eyes held hers. What would you have me do with it? The question hung between them, weighted with implications for both their futures. In this moment, Ethan was ceding control to her, the final test of trust between them. Sophia took a deep breath, considering her answer carefully. The truth, however painful, is better than living with lies. Release it all. Let justice take its course, even if it means we both lose something in the process. A smile, genuine, unguarded, transformed Ethan's features. I was hoping you'd say that. He connected the drive to a terminal and initiated a file transfer. By morning, these files will be in the hands of federal prosecutors, international investigative journalists, and financial regulators worldwide. The empire your uncle built, the control he's exercised over so many lives, including our own. It ends today. As the files uploaded, Ethan turned back to Sophia, closing the distance between them until only inches separated them. Our challenge, he said softly, technically ends at midnight. We still have hours to go. Are you conceding defeat? Sophia asked, her voice equally soft, the tension between them now charged with something beyond fear or suspicion. No, Ethan replied, his eyes never leaving hers. I'm proposing a new challenge altogether, one where neither of us seeks to control the other, where trust isn't tested, but freely given. Outside, the storm was beginning to ease, the first hints of dawn lightening the eastern sky. Inside their sanctuary, As sirens wailed in the distance and the world they knew crumbled around them, Ethan and Sophia faced each other not as opponents in a game of resistance, but as equals, standing on the threshold of something neither had dared hope for. A partnership, Sophia suggested, understanding his unspoken offer. Something more, Ethan corrected gently, if you're willing. For a moment, they stood suspended in possibility, the space between them charged with all that remained unsaid. Then, as the first rays of sunlight broke through the storm clouds, Ethan reached out and took Sophia's hand in his. The touch, simple, undemanding, breached the final barrier between them. Not a gesture of possession or control, but one of connection freely offered and accepted. "I believe I've lost our original challenge," Ethan acknowledged, his fingers intertwining with hers. Sophia smiled, the expression reaching her eyes with genuine warmth. "Perhaps," she agreed, stepping closer, until the distance between them vanished entirely. "Or perhaps we've both won something far more valuable." In the soft light of dawn, as authorities arrived to take Pierce and his men into custody, as the evidence they'd gathered began its journey toward justice, Ethan and Sophia sealed their new understanding with a kiss that promised not possession, but partnership, not control, but freedom. And in that moment of surrender, they both discovered what they had spent their lives searching for: the courage to be vulnerable, the strength to trust, and the profound relief of finally letting go of the illusion of control. 3 months later, as summer yielded to autumn, Blackridge Manor stood transformed. The imposing castle that had once served as Ethan's fortress now hummed with life and purpose. The great hall that had witnessed the beginning of their unusual challenge was now filled with artists, educators, and innovators, beneficiaries of the newly established Blackwood Reynolds Foundation for the Arts. In the aftermath of Daniel Reynolds' organization being exposed, both Ethan and Sophia had faced their own reckonings. Parts of Ethan's business empire had indeed been built on manipulated opportunities, requiring painful restructuring and public acknowledgement. Sophia had confronted her uncle one final time before he faced justice, finding closure if not forgiveness for years of manipulation. Together, they had weathered the storm of public scrutiny, legal investigations, and personal doubts. The journey had not been easy, but it had been honest, a path chosen with clear eyes and open hearts. On the cliffside terrace overlooking the ocean, Ethan found Sophia reviewing grant proposals for young artists. The setting sun painted her in gold, and for a moment he simply watched her, still marveling at the unexpected turn his life had taken. "Second thoughts?" Sophia asked without looking up, somehow sensing his presence as she always seemed to do now. "Never." Ethan moved to join her, sitting beside her on the stone bench. "Though I do occasionally wonder what would have happened if I'd simply walked away that night at the gala." Sophia set aside her papers, turning to face him fully. "We'd both still be prisoners in cages of our own making. You in your empire of control, me in my uncle's world of manipulation. Instead, we've created something neither of us could have, built alone." Ethan took her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them, though I maintain I could have won that challenge if Pierce hadn't interrupted. Sophia laughed, the sound carrying on the ocean breeze. "Your stubborn pride remains intact, I see." "Not pride," Ethan corrected, pulling her closer. "Just acknowledging my strengths. Control has always been my specialty." "And yet," Sophia murmured, her lips inches from his, "your greatest victory came when you finally let go." As the last light of day faded into twilight, Ethan Blackwood, the man who had built an empire on the principle of absolute control, willingly surrendered once again to the one force he had never expected to conquer him: love freely given and received without condition or constraint. In the end, their challenge had revealed a truth more powerful than either had anticipated. True strength lies not in maintaining perfect control, but in having the courage to be vulnerable, not in resisting temptation, but in embracing the most human temptation of all, the desire to connect, to trust, to love without reservation. And in that surrender, they had both found a victory beyond measure. Dear listeners, we hope you've been captivated by Ethan and Sophia's journey from control to vulnerability, from suspicion to trust. Their story reminds us that sometimes our greatest strength comes not from maintaining walls around our hearts, but from finding the courage to let them down. If their emotional struggle resonated with you, we've prepared a special playlist of equally compelling stories exploring the complexities of trust, power, and connection. Find it by clicking to your left. If you enjoyed this tale of transformation, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Every day, we bring you unique stories that delve into life's most